Today we're talking about God uses his power to serve. And in the third letter that we have from the Apostle John, that was a letter that he wrote to his friend Gaius, who was a leader of one of the churches in Asia Minor at the time. Now, although we don't know exactly when John wrote this letter, many scholars believe it was written while he was imprisoned on the Isle of Patmos, and this was toward the end of John's life. And it was also during the time when he received the revelation, the vision that is related in the final book of the Bible. And perhaps it was because John had witnessed this vision that he called the revelation, that he was really seeing and beginning to understand that there is much more going on in this world than meets the eye. That the world, even the whole universe, is caught up in a war over the character and government of our God. And what are the issues at stake in this war? Those are likely the ideas swirling around in John's head as he is writing these small letters to the churches. And it's interesting that in this third letter, he draws a sharp distinction between good and evil, using as an example a man by the name of Diotrephes, who was a prominent church leader in the region where Gaius lived. I did write a letter to the church, John says, but Diotrephes, who wants to be head of everything, does not recognize us. And it doesn't stop there, alas. For although he wants to be leader, he refuses the duty of welcoming the brothers himself and stops those who would like to do so, even excommunicates them. Never let evil be your example, dear friend of mine, but always good. The man who does good is God's man, but the man who does evil does not know God at all. Now, what really jumped out to me here was to realize just what it is that John is labeling evil when he says, never let evil be your example. Let's examine that for a moment. John is saying, this is evil, so don't imitate it. And what was he saying was evil? Was it dishonesty? Or sexual immorality? Or greed? Or violence? No, what was it? Pride, somebody said. He wants to be head of everything. John warned his friend not to emulate that. Diotrephes wanted to be the leader, to be in control of everything. And this led him to refuse hospitality to the brothers, who were teachers or evangelists who were traveling around amongst the churches. He didn't want to welcome them, presumably so he could remain the center of attention and authority. And this is what John equates with evil a couple of sentences later. Isn't that a bit odd? Maybe a little surprising? I mean, when you think of something that's evil, you think Hitler or Stalin or Pol Pot. You think of these dictators and mass graves and plots to take over the world. And that's the thing. We are so used to thinking of evil in terms of awful actions, murder, rape, robbery, exploitation of others, that it's so easy to forget that pride and the lust for power and control are what truly lie behind all those things. Thus, when it comes to the condition of the heart, it doesn't really matter how many other people your actions hurt. If you are cherishing the desire for power and control in your heart, you are just as Hitlerish as Hitler. You're cultivating the same seeds that, if given the right conditions, would grow into the same terrible tree that emerged in Germany in the 1930s. If you are nurturing pride in your heart, you are just as satanic as Satan. You are cultivating the same seeds that, if given the right conditions, would grow into the same terrible tree that first emerged at some point in eternity past. That's what I think John understood from the Revelation. That this enemy of God's, who had once been one of his most brilliant angels, fell from his exalted position and started a war because he wouldn't relinquish his pride. We looked at a snippet of this passage last week, and today we'll look at all the verses here in Isaiah 14 where God says this about Satan. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. You see, John equated this desire for supremacy with evil because that's how evil began in the first place. And wherever and whenever we cherish the same desire, we're on the same slippery slope Lucifer was on before he eventually decided to ignite a war that he hoped would destroy his own maker. Think of the insanity of that. That's what pride will do to you. I will raise my throne above your stars. I will be like the Most High. By contrast, Christ, whose throne was already above the stars, and who was actually the Most High, he's described this way in Philippians by Paul. Paul writes, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. And what is that mindset? Here it is. Who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. This is the fundamental difference between the mindset of Christ and the mindset of Satan. The fundamental difference between good and evil. One uses its power to serve, and the other hoards its power and refuses to serve. Christ left his throne in order to come here and serve, and Diotrephes was refusing to welcome and serve his brothers because he didn't want to relinquish any of his power. If you strip all the extraneous stuff away, this is the essential difference between good and evil. These two motives. Because every action eventually stems from one of these two motives. Either we are eager to have power and position over others, or we are eager to help others. Either we are eager to be served, or we are eager to serve. It's as simple as that. Lucifer became Satan not because he killed a bunch of angels or robbed the heavenly storehouse or burned down the pearly gates. Lucifer became Satan because he was thirsty for power and position. His downfall was simply that he nurtured in his heart the desire to be head of everything, to raise his throne above the stars, to cast himself into the position of God, the Most High. This means that the original sin wasn't rape or murder or lying or eating the wrong fruit. It was the lust for power. Lucifer fed his pride and fed his pride and fed his pride until it got so strong that it rose up and devoured him. And if you nurture in your heart the desire to rule over others, it will eventually ruin you too. You've heard the old saying, haven't you? Absolute power corrupts. What? Absolutely. Absolutely. But the power is not the problem. It's the desire to wield it over others. Because if power were the problem, we could say that God himself is at risk, couldn't we? He has infinite power. And not only that, but his power and position can't be threatened by anyone. As one of my favorite Bible texts says in Daniel chapter 4, verse 35, no one can oppose him or challenge him or even ask him, what do you think you're doing? I love that. Can't even ask him, what do you think you're doing? God's power is infinite and untouchable. And through the ages, many people have been scared of his omnipotence. Understandably. For who would you want to be in such a position with that kind of power? You look out in our world today and just imagine if there was anyone on the world stage who had that kind of power and the wrong agenda. Who would you want to be in such a position with that kind of power? But my friends, that's precisely the crux of the gospel, which means good news. It's good news that the God who is infinite in power is also infinite in humility. That the God whose throne was already above the stars gave it all up and became a slave. That the God who holds all the power is not the kind of guy who wants all the power. And that's the only kind of person who can be trusted with the power. For God, power and position are simply a means by which he serves others. He harbors in his heart no desire to be greater than you or me or anyone else. He is greater, to be sure, but he doesn't wish to be greater. And that's why he spends all of his time and energy lifting up and blessing and exalting his creation. Instead of using his power and position for his own advantage, he always uses it to serve. May we follow his example more and more each day as we shun what is evil and seek to do what is good. That is, may we be more eager to serve than we are to rule. Amen.